We got one more guest, one more segment here for this Wednesday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is Wes Reynolds, at Wes Reynolds, and the number one on Twitter, contributor to the Point Spread Weekly newsletter, and also a host over on VSIN. Wes, how's it going today, man?
Hey, Adam. Good to be with you. How are you, sir?
Doing very well, buddy. Appreciate your time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining me, especially because, as you and I were talking about before we started recording here, hey, damn, this is the busiest time of year, and it's hard to keep tabs on everything.
It is. I mean, because it seems like there's never really a break. I mean, unless you get like a totally imbalanced or weird schedule, like in hockey, where it seemed like every team was in action last night, and then you get 2 games, and then you get a full slate, and then you get 2 games. And I mean, that's kind of what you're dealing with there. And I mean, with just so much stuff and action going on, and still in the college football regular season and then NFL well underway, of course. You just have a lot going on your plate at the same time.
All right, so we'll dive into the college football card here for Week 13. You sent over a handful of games to me here today, and I think some of these are very interesting types of matchups here. And we start in the Big 12 with this game between Oklahoma State and West Virginia. Oklahoma State 7-point road favorite heading up to Morgantown for an early kickoff here. And, I was talking about liking West Virginia last week on the show, liked them a lot against Kansas State, didn't expect the outright upset, but nice to see that West Virginia finally made the switch from Austin Kendall to Jarrett Dagey. Is that part of the reason why you like the Mountaineers here this week?
It is. And I think, look, you're not fooling the odds makers in terms of the point spreads where you got this West Virginia team that is trying to kind of backdoor and get bowl eligible right now, but all of a sudden they get a big win on the road. Their other one was at Kansas, of course, before they made their offensive coordinator switch. But all of a sudden you get a team with a little bit of confidence here, and Oklahoma State has kind of been rolling along. They've won 3 straight. They beat 1 at Iowa State, 1 against TCU, and then a nice win over Kansas last weekend. And look, we know what we get with Oklahoma State. We get a pretty good offense. They even made an offensive coordinator change this year. Still no problem. These ratings aren't based on the quality of opponent or any kind of advanced stats, but you look and they got a top 10 offense in the nation and one of the better rushing offenses in the nation. But really, this is almost a play just kind of against them because they got to go on the road with a shaky defense, not a deplorable defense, not one of the dregs of college football, but you still look at them, they're 116th in the country in passing yards allowed per game at 273. So this is a defense that I think they're just so shaky laying points on the road, even to a West Virginia team that's 4-6 and trying to really backdoor into a bowl game. But yeah, I think maybe West Virginia has found a little life, and I mean they've still continued to compete. The cupboard, I guess, relatively bare there in West Virginia, but I think Neil Brown's doing a solid job with this team. It's just they started out so slow, and now they've made the quarterback change late. I think it's at least given them some motivation. They're a team that I think now feels that they got to have realistic bowl hopes. If they could pull off this one, then they go to TCU, and basically it's going to be like a loser leaves town match, essentially, because I think you're going to have 2 5-6 teams basically fighting for a bowl in the last week of the season.
Well, that's an excellent segue into another side that you're kind of looking at here. Game 137, 138 is TCU and Oklahoma. We talked about this one a little bit on Tuesday's show, but again, with some of these bigger games here, and this one does draw the primetime slot, do like to crowdsource opinions a little bit whenever possible. You kind of like the idea of laying the big number here with the Sooners. Why is that?
I do, and I think Gary Patterson has done a solid job with TCU, and I think Duggan long term, he's had some good games and some bad games, but he's a freshman quarterback, and long term, I think he'll be a good one in Fort Worth for TCU. But I do kind of like Oklahoma here, really, because if you look at them, they look like a favorite on the surface that you should go against. Of course, they blew that lead to Iowa State and had to kind of be life and death at the end and survive a missed 2-point conversion just to get by Iowa State as 2 touchdown favorites. Then they go last week on the road, get down big to Baylor, and eventually come back and win in the final seconds in Waco. That fourth quarter, I mean, they were down double digits, and then to be able to come back, I think it showed a little. I mean, I guess some would say it showed weakness, but I guess it's in the eye of the beholder too, because it maybe showed weakness, but it also showed strength in the fact that, hey, there's a belief on this team that they can basically win and that they're never out of a game. And I think what that does in this spot is it carries momentum. It gives this team so much momentum going forward that, look, we're not out of this yet. They're still in the playoffs, and it almost feels like they're sitting on one because they look like a very weak favorite that's easy to kind of go against. But I think they're sitting on one, and they haven't done so in a few weeks, where they're looking maybe to blow somebody out and impress and kind of move their way up, because the top 3 are going to stay, I think, the top 3 by and large. I don't see them necessarily getting beat. It theoretically could happen, though, but I think any combination of LSU, Clemson, Ohio State are clearly the top 3, and then it's still wide open for that number 4. Georgia, of course, has the inside track, but they're eventually going to have to get LSU in the SEC championship game. If they lose there, then that number 4 spot is really wide open. And Oklahoma, I think, certainly is one of the contenders of that. Either one of the 2 Pac-12 teams are going to be knocked out of it because they're probably going to play each other in that Pac-12 title game, Oregon and Utah. So that leaves Oklahoma to potentially go through the back door. And I think their hopes looked dead a few weeks ago in Manhattan, but now still very much alive.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things to talk about here with regards to this game. One of them is, much like we've seen with Clemson trying to put some style points up there when they were outside of the top 4, Oklahoma has a lot of incentive to do that too. So there is that element to it where if they get up big, they're not going to sit on it, or at least they shouldn't, with Lincoln Riley understanding what's at stake. The other thing here is, I mean, look, these numbers don't come from out of nowhere. They don't come from out of the blue. I mean, there is a reason why Oklahoma was a 17.5 point favorite at the open. I mean, again, yeah, you could say they look like a weak favorite, like you said, but again, from a power rating standpoint, factoring in home field, this is about where Oklahoma should be. So, the idea of them not being a deserving favorite, there's a lot of recency bias in that narrative. And I agree with you that maybe this is a good week to capitalize on it.
Yeah, I think so. And then you have this TCU team that, how much energy are they going to have? Because this team has to fight for its life seemingly every week. They should have beaten Baylor. They didn't get it done. Had to go to double overtime, even though they led pretty much the whole game. Then they're in that dogfight hanging on by 2 against Texas Tech. And they've just had so many of these close shaves that you wonder what their energy level is going to be. If Oklahoma puts up 2 quick scores in like the first 6-7 minutes of the first quarter, you wonder where this team's going to be. And that's just something I could just visualize it happening where, okay, Oklahoma scores first, TCU stalls, then Oklahoma scores again. And before you know it, there's like 8.5 minutes on the clock and they're already down 14-0 in the first quarter. And that just a team that I think the energy that's a little bit running on fumes at this point, then your energy really gets zapped if that scenario happens.
And I think that this is something to look at too. There are 16 5-5 teams right now here this week. And exactly the point you're making here is that if you're TCU and you're down 21-0 in the first quarter, you start thinking ahead to next week. You start thinking ahead to that game against West Virginia because you want to get bowl eligibility. If you're a 5-5 team and you're getting your ass kicked in the first quarter or at halftime, you may start planning for the next week. You may kind of sit some guys out. You may kind of let some of the underclassmen play because you want to get into that next game healthy enough to give yourself a real good chance at 6 wins. So I would pay attention to that out there from a live betting standpoint, where if you've got a 5-5 team and they're not getting that 6th win this week, I think in the second half, they may just kind of fold up the tent and plan for the following game.
Yeah, no question about it. Yeah, the last thing you want to do is get your now the guy that's your starting quarterback, and especially TCU, who if this kid goes down, they don't have much behind him because the regular guy Collins, who was kind of the co-starter earlier in the season, he's hurt, and then you've had a couple kids. The kid Delton, who was a graduate transfer from Kansas State, he transferred. They had another kid transfer, so there's just not a lot behind these guys.
Yeah, definitely an angle to keep an eye on. Again, from a live betting standpoint, second half betting standpoint, something like that, because there will be teams that fall into that category here, not just this year, but something for you to keep in mind next year as well with these 5-5 teams here in that second to last regular season game. One more college side you're looking at, you're thinking about going against the grain of the line move here, so I want to hear your take on this one. Game 143, 144, Illinois and Iowa. Iowa up from 12.5 to 15.5, but it seems like you think this number may be getting a little bit too high.
I do, and I haven't really seen a soul on Illinois, which either should really worry me or should really make me excited to play them, depending on your perspective. But this was one I was looking at when it was I thought it was going to go up to maybe 14, and then perhaps go back down. Maybe there are going to be some guys doing a little bit of funny money with this thing. Look, Illinois, I think, got the bye week at the right time in the fact that they got bowl eligible. They had that comeback against Michigan State. And that's why I think people are fading them, because they shouldn't have had a prayer in that game. Michigan State turned it over. It was 28-3. Illinois gets a late touchdown at the end of the first half. And then the momentum was on. Michigan State started turning the ball over. The offense started to be anemic, which is usual for Sparty this year, both this year and last year. But I don't think Illinois, look, I think they're excited that they know they're going to a bowl game and they've got to 6 wins. But the line adjustment seems to fake because they've lost 5 straight to Iowa. They got beat 63-0 last year in Champaign. And that was the worst defeat in this rivalry for the history of Illinois football. These teams have been playing off and on since 1889. So Illinois also motivated. They're trying to get their first winning regular season since 2007. If they don't get it here, and I don't think they're going to win outright here, but if they don't get it here, they'll have a chance to do that against Northwestern. You've got an Iowa team that does come off they finally got their signature win. They've been a good, solid team all year, but they haven't really beaten anybody. Well, now they beat a team that they've owned over the last several years in Minnesota. They keep the bronze pig, the Floyd of Rosedale trophy. They never trailed in the game, but they did get outgained 431 to 290. It was really kind of the defense holding on. And Iowa before that had lost 3 single-digit games to Penn State, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and they get that win. But the question is, I think, too, how much do they have left in the emotional tank? Look, they knock off an undefeated team that was a legit dark horse to get inside the college football playoff. Now they've got Senior Day, which Senior Day, and we talk about this too a lot with college basketball, it's a melancholy day. It's a sad day. It's not a happy day. I mean, yeah, your family's there, and your parents and your siblings and your girlfriend or whomever, and everybody's there, but this is the last time you get to play on your home field. And now you've got them having to participate in this. And there's something to be said, I think, for Illinois of just having belief, even though you're a big underdog in this game. Started out 2-4 in the season, had back-to-back late home losses to Eastern Michigan and Nebraska, but then now they've covered 5 straight, and they've won 4 games to get to 6-4, and I think Illinois has that belief. Look, they could have packed it in at East Lansing when they were down 28-3, but they never did. So Lovey and his guys showed some character here. They're not the more talented football team in this matchup, but I do think this line is getting a little bit out of whack, and I think you'll see some buyback here in the next 2-3 days.
Yeah, of the three games we talked about, I like this one the most. I think you talked about a lot of really good angles there. And in particular, again, when we look at this time of the year, how much emotion is left in the gas tank? How close to E are some of these teams? A team like Iowa playing so many close games in their marquee matchups. Yeah, maybe they go out there and blow out Illinois, but maybe they don't because they don't have a whole lot left in that emotional gas tank, especially coming off that big win. Illinois chance to reset coming off the bye. I will say this. I mean, this move towards my number, my power rating line is 15.5. But again, I think situationally and all the different elements that you talked about, I think there are a lot of compelling reasons to take a strong look at the Fighting Illini here in this weekend's matchup. We transition over to the NFL side of the spectrum here, and we start with a pretty interesting game that we haven't touched on yet this week. Game 253, 254, Denver and Buffalo. Long trip for the Broncos, back-to-back road game situation, but you like them a little bit here, getting 4 against the Bills.
Yeah, and what you just said, long trip for Buffalo, back-to-back road situation, and yet they're taking the money here on this price. And so I kind of think, okay, why is that happening? I don't know if it's necessarily a backing of Denver, as more of it is perhaps a fade of Buffalo. And look, Buffalo's already, I have their season wins over. They're already matching it, so they need one more to, they're dormy, to use a golf term, to get their season wins here. But if you look at Buffalo over the last month, I mean, the two teams they've beaten are the Dolphins and the Redskins. So I think that there's a little bit of, you got to show me a little bit more. They've shown me, I think Sean McDermott's a good coach, and I think they have a really good defense, but they don't exactly overwhelm you when you watch them. I think they caught Miami, even though on a road game, they caught Miami in a good spot because Miami was feeling themselves a little bit because they were supposed to be the worst team in the history of the NFL. And then they got 2 wins in a row. So, eventually we talk about emotional gas tank. I think they had that happiness there and got a couple wins in a row. I mean, they know that they're not going anywhere, where it's kind of that happiness is there, but then that reality sets in. And that okay, look, we can only be, our ceiling's only so high here. And Buffalo, I think, really took advantage of that last week. And with Denver, there is an emotional factor there too, because they blew that game in Minnesota, and they really should have won the game. I had the 10.5 with Denver, and they really should have won that game. Minnesota makes a big fourth quarter comeback and wins the game, but I like what I've seen a little bit. I don't know if he's the savior, and I'm not sure he's the long-term answer in Denver, but I like what I've seen a little bit out of Brandon Allen. I think that this is a guy, I mean, how long has it been for the Denver Broncos to have a quarterback that you can have confidence can throw the ball down the field and you can have a couple long gains? And that's what they had against Minnesota last week. So I think you got a Denver team that I think knows that they're not going to go anywhere for playoffs or anything, being at 3-7, that they're just not going to rally into the playoffs. But I think they got a little bit of confidence. And I think when they see that, when you see that your quarterback can make you plays, that I think gives the defense and the rest of especially the rest of the team motivation, and that says, okay, we got a guy here, we got a dude here, so we don't have to feel like our margin for error is 0 and that we got to be totally perfect because we got guys that can make plays for us.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, it's a different type of mindset for certain teams coming off of a collapse like that. For Denver, like you said, I mean, they're not going anywhere anyway. So the fact that they didn't get that win probably pisses them off. It's not like it was a lost opportunity to get back into a playoff race or something like that. Probably does keep them a little bit more focused here this week because wins are so difficult to come by that now they're going to say, well, let's go get another one. Let's go actually finish this one off. Whereas you have a good team that blows a lead like that, and maybe you draw a parallel to somebody like Baylor in college football this week, that one's going to linger a whole lot more for a team like that. So I think that's an interesting angle, an interesting way of looking at this game. And again, I mean, you've had a lot of people wanting to fade the Bills anyway. So we are seeing that here. And in fact, we could be seeing 3.5 here sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to happen. I'll be interested to see what the Super Contest and the Circus Sports Million lines come out to this week, because one of the things too, and in talking with some of these guys on the VSIN shows that I'm on, is that they are basically, when they're putting out lines for these contests, and especially the super contest guys that I've talked to, they basically are trying to put the line where they think it's going to close. So that's what they're trying to do. So like it's 4 right now, and it may stick at 4, so they may just go ahead and put out 4 because it's market wide. But they also could put out 3.5 because they probably think it's going to close more toward the Denver side than the Buffalo side.
One more game here on the NFL card to talk about, and then we'll finish up with some golf here. Game 269, 270, Dallas and New England. I've bet against New England. I've picked against New England 3 or 4 times across both contests here, using the same picks in both contests over the course of the season, and every single time I've gotten beat. So
that's the story of the last 20 years.
That's true. That is very, very true. Is this the week that you go against New England and actually cash a ticket?
I think it could be, but then again, we always say that. So if those that are in contest entries want to just kind of shirk this game and say, well, I'm not going to use it, I'm not, I'm either going to play him or not fade him, I could certainly understand that and couldn't argue that. Look, 6.5, and I was talking about this with Dwayne Gallucci over at the Rampart Casino, which is a satellite property of the South Point out in Las Vegas. He thinks this is going to close closer to 6 than it will be to 7. I don't think you're going to see a 7 here. I know you've got a couple where 6.5s are juiced, like you're seeing at the Westgate Superbook USA minus 120. They don't want to put 7 out there because people will gobble them up very, very quickly. But yeah, I think this is going to stay with 6, 6.5. And obviously at 6.5, you're going to see a bunch of Patriots teasers because you can tease them down to essentially a half a point or 1, depending on how many points you want to tease them down. But I think you're going to get enough Dallas support where this action, I don't think it'll look like last week where the books, most of them pretty much needed the Eagles. I think you'll get plenty of Dallas support here. And look, I like what I've seen. I know that the defense was a little shaky against Detroit. It was shaky against Minnesota. So basically, I mean, if you want to move the ball on Dallas because they'll over pursue a little bit, run a bunch of screen passes, run a big screen game like Minnesota did with Dalvin Cook, and you're gonna pile up yards. But I like what I've seen out of Dallas, and I've always been a little lukewarm on Dak in terms of, okay, is he really the $40 million man? And I'm not sure that he is, but the guy's been pretty damn good the last couple weeks. And this is the best I've seen him play. I think he's been fantastic. And I think really what you need in Dallas is you need the coaches to stay out of the way. You need Jason Garrett, maybe by association Jerry Jones, just stay out of the way. Let Dak do what he does, man, because he's doing it. He's finding guys down the field. The receivers are healthy with Gallup and Cooper and all the different weapons that they have. This is a Dallas team, though, that I still think has something to prove. They're as talented as any team in the NFC. Everybody before the season talked about the Philadelphia Eagles. Oh, they got so much talent. They got so much talent. They do. They've got a lot of injuries, to be fair, but Dallas has talent up and down that roster. They really do. And the one thing that they haven't done is really beaten a real elite team. If you want to be in the elite, you got to beat the elite. The old Ric Flair slogan, to be the man, you got to beat the man. And Dallas kind of needs to metal up here and show something that they can beat an elite team. And it's a tough environment. It's the toughest environment you can probably get because you're playing the number 1 team in the AFC in their house in Foxborough. But I do like Dallas a little bit here. Unfortunately, I don't think you're going to see 7. If you want 7, you're going to have to pay that tax to get it, and probably take +7 minus about 125, because we know on key numbers it's going to be juiced a little bit more than if you bought a half point onto another number. So, yeah, I do like the Cowboys here, and I think what Tom Brady said, look, they're always so politically correct where they don't really give you anything. But I thought Tom Brady gave some insight where it's like, hey, our defense and our special teams have to do it for us right now. And I don't think he was necessarily telling the truth or telling falsehoods there or playing possum.
Yeah, and I think too, last week with Philadelphia, it's a little bit different with a 3.5 or 4 point number than a 6.5 because New England's offense is not great. I mean, they've scored a lot of points this year because the defense has forced a lot of turnovers. They're plus 18 in turnover margin, giving them some short fields. This is a game where, assuming Dallas takes care of the football, as they should, as they have most of the year, you're asking a really pedestrian New England offense to get margin for you. And maybe this is the type of spot you want to look to go against that. Yeah, they covered some big numbers against Miami. Miami's terrible. Washington's awful. Giants, same thing. They're not very good. Jets, they're not very good. And the Browns, yeah, they covered the double-digit number there, but the Browns were the better team for most of that game. So I don't know if I can do it again. I don't know if I have the heart to do it again, but I think it's Dallas or nothing for me.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Browns, and the Browns, ironically enough, as poorly as it seems they've been coached this year, really contemplate a little bit of the blueprint for, I think, the rest of the league. You can run on these guys. And Nick Chubb ran all over if he doesn't fumble a couple times after really big runs because the Patriots are so good at forcing turnovers. Cleveland's right in that game. And I mean, and I did bet the Browns in that game too. They really should have covered and probably should have had a chance to really compete for the win at the end, but didn't get it done. Dallas can still run on these guys. They couldn't do it against Minnesota 2 weeks ago on Sunday Night Football, but look, Zeke, I think, is back in football shape, and he can get loose on these guys, and that makes Dallas awful dangerous because we've known that they've always had the ability to pretty much to run the football and put up big numbers, but now you got a Dak Prescott that's got some confidence here that I think is probably playing the best football he's ever played in his young career. And when you combine that and mix that together, you could have a potential for a pretty lethal offense.
All right, so we finish up this Wednesday edition of the show talking a little bit of golf here. We've got a tournament that starts tonight over in Dubai and then a tournament that starts tomorrow in the PGA Tour down in Sea Island, Georgia. We'll start with the first one here, the one that tees off tonight. I believe it's 11:30 Eastern time for the DP World Tour Championship, the European Tour Championship event. Rory's your 4-1 favorite. John Rahm is about 6-1. Fleetwood, Reed, Rose, Hatton, all in double digits here. Wes, who do you like in this event?
Yeah, I mean, it is really tough to make a case, and I did not bet this, so I'm going to try to make a case when I say it's really tough to make a case. Rory McIlroy should be the rightful favorite here. He's won this event twice. He's won 2 big events really in the last 2 months. I think he's got 4 finishes, a third or better in the last 6 events coming in. So the form is great. He just won the WGC, HSBC in China. He won the Tour Championship. So he's the rightful favorite here. Rahm has been off a little bit of a long layoff, so he might be one I'm looking to skirt here, even though he did win on his course debut at the Earth Course here at Dubai 2 years ago. But just looking a little bit down the board, one I did kind of like, but he finished runner-up, was tied for second here last year. He's been playing a lot more European Tour events. I did take a look with Patrick Reed at 16-1. He's about 16 or 18-1, depending on your shop. He's got, I think, a little bit of confidence because he ended up having to be a captain's pick for the President's Cup starting next month in Australia. And I think that maybe gave him a little bit of a confidence because if you remember the Ryder Cup, he had played so well in international competitions, but last year in Paris, it was an absolute disaster. They paired him with Tiger Woods. Reed, I think, clearly brought the team down. And there was a lot of drama with him and Spieth not playing together anymore. So you've got a guy that comes in with good finishes. He's been top 10 the last 2 weeks on these European Tour events. So I liked him. I also liked Paul Casey at 25-1. Hasn't played in this event in about 5 years, but has a lot of desert golf experience, has won in Abu Dhabi, has won in Bahrain, of course, lives in Arizona pretty much full time. So practices a lot in the desert. So he's got a pretty good desert record. And then One guy that's a little bit of a long shot, Lee Westwood, and I saw him anywhere from about 60 to 70 to 1. He's 46 years old, so a lot of people aren't prone to pick him, but he actually was one of the best putters in the field in the Ned Bank last week in Sun City in South Africa. Finished top 5. He's working with a former European Tour player, actually still a European Tour player, Robert Rock, on his putting, and his putting has really been a lot better. And it showed last week. He was really burning the edges down there in Sun City. And he was the guy that actually won this event, the inaugural event of the DP Tour Championship back in 2009. So he does have a win on the course. And look, there's 50 players in the field. It used to be 60. There's only 50. So you really can't go deep and play too many guys here.
All right, so we transition to North America here. We go to the PGA Tour event, Sea Island, Georgia. And one of the things we talked about yesterday with Brian Blessing with regards to his handicap for this tournament, and I know this is something you've focused on here in the past as well, a lot of guys live in Sea Island, Georgia. So they've got a lot of familiarity with this course and this environment.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's priced into the market as well. I ended up not playing a ton of guys that live on Sea Island, but that have plenty of Georgia ties. Harris English is one that does live at least nearby, who I did take last week, was right in the mix to get a win at Mayakoba, and then had a double bogey at 16 because, of course, the last 4 holes, it was darkness, so they had to start crack of dawn early Monday morning, and English didn't make that birdie putt that he had left over at a 15-footer for birdie. It could have tied for the lead, didn't make it, and then gets a double bogey that put him down to 5th when he had a legitimate shot to kind of backdoor and win the tournament. But he was the shortest price guy. I liked it 25 to 1. A couple other guys, Russell Henley, who's very familiar with this course, loves the Bermuda greens. Of course, he's a Georgia Bulldog, and actually ended up playing, I think, 3 or 4 guys that played their college golf at University of Georgia because they have experience, at least on the course, even if they don't live in St. Simon's Island or in Sea Island. Brian Harmon was another guy that I played as well. That's an ex-Georgia Bulldog, and there's a lot of those guys in this field. Kevin Kisner has won this event before as well. Zach Johnson was a guy I took a shot at that has not won in a really long time, but he's kind of one of the touring pros for this course. It's really him and Davis Love III that are the 2 main guys, and he's been playing a little bit better of late, Zach Johnson. So I took him at around 50 to 1. Some good long shots. Robbie Shelton, who was on the first page of the leaderboard last week at Mayakoba, has had a couple really good finishes in the fall series at around 100 to 1. And then Mark Hubbard, I won with Lanto Griffin in Houston, but the guy who finished right behind him was Mark Hubbard, 125 to 1. Hubbard is the guy that finished second in Houston, and these Bermuda greens are similar to the ones he putted on at the Houston Open where he finished second. So you can go a little deep in this tournament. You don't get much chalk. I mean, yeah, Webb Simpson's been in the playoff here many years ago, and he's 10 to 1, and he's the highest ranked player in the field. But this is a tournament where you'll get some middle or longer price guys hit.
Wes Reynolds, who's working and follow on Twitter at Wes Reynolds and the number 1. You can check him out on VSIN as well as in that Point Spread Weekly newsletter. Wes, when can people hear you on VSIN?
Yeah, I'll be on tomorrow and Friday, Thursday and Friday, 8 to 10 Pacific. I do the second half of the Green Zone, and then on the weekends, 2 to 6 Pacific on Saturday, kind of that into that middle 3:30 Eastern to the late college football window on Saturday evening, and then 3 to 7 Pacific on Sunday for the late window into the NFL and going into the Sunday night football game with Green Bay and San Francisco, and then Monday nights 6 to 10 Pacific.
Well, again, make sure you follow Wes on Twitter at Wes Reynolds and the number 1. Wes, appreciate your time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll talk to you again next week.
Adam, a pleasure, man. Thank you.